Hello and welcome to yet another lecture number 31. And this one is about the question of finance, which has been coming almost in every lecture. And we know what it is, the reluctance of the colonial state to spend too much. And so on the other hand, so to address the question, because somehow spending has to be done, so it can't be entirely avoided, so it has to come from somewhere. And one of the important avenues that the colonial state was always having its eye on was volunteer participation. So from the beginning, so from the company days itself, so there was this desire to replicate the model of volunteerism, which was actually there in Britain in the domain of healthcare. Individuals and societies voluntarily contributing. So that's a sense of feeling good, of being of some great use to the society, and medicine is one field where it is particularly felt because it's about the very living the life of the people, and also not just living, but when there is a suffering, then that produces more empathy, and somehow doing something about the empathy, about alleviating the pain of someone, there's something which is happening in front of the eye. So this gives a great sense of satisfaction and solace, not only to the people being cured, but also to the giver in some way, either the giver of the treatment, or in this case the giver of the financial wherewithal. So the idea was to promote that kind of private charity or institutionalized charity here in the colonial context also. So charity, of course, is not something new to the colonies or any society, indigenous societies where the colonizers went. But it was more associated with rulers. So you would have seen about how Ashoka built this, so and so Harsha built the guest houses where traveling people were freely accommodated. They were given free food, medical facilities, or donations made by princes to temples. So not only for the temples to be maintained or renovated, or more kinds of things added to the infrastructure of the temple or the facilities of the temple, but going to the temple, the fund going to the temple, which in turn would go to the public through the charity works done under the auspices of temples or mosques or any kind of religious institutions, like free food for the pilgrims who went there, or generally the destitute and others who would congregate in such kind of institutions for alms, ALMS alms. So in the so that has always been there traditionally, and in the colonial context, the state. So that there we have examples of our own states, however good, efficient, inefficient, good, bad, ugly, whatever it is. All states had, most states had that measure of charity associated with them, and in the colonial state situation, the state did not want to do even that minimum that a state should actually do. Forget about extra, going the extra mile in terms of charity and all that, but even that minimum that the state should have done, especially in an important field like medicine. So it wanted to spend minimally, and wanted much of that important spending also to be done by charity. And of course, health as a field was a good candidate for that kind of devolution. So the colonial state was not eager to spend not only in health, but many other fields, because like especially starting with the East India Company as a commercial organization, the primary aim was to, especially in the initial days, to make quick money in quick time. So devolution in a sense, like passing on the buck, not the kind of devolution that we will be talking, say when we are talking about the Government of India Act of 1919, diarchy and all that. So this kind of passing the buck for that kind of activity. Trend health was one fitting candidate for that kind of charity, because as I was saying earlier, so that gives a special sense of attachment, satisfaction of having helped lives, helped people in ailments, or even having saved some lives which otherwise would have been lost. And this also building on pre-existing such kind of sentiments attached, some of them colored by religious beliefs, for instance, like the belief in karma, the good you do at this time in this world will fetch you some benefits in the next world. So those kinds of religion-based sentiments through which people are naturally predisposed, and particularly to this kind of field. And of course, apart from those kinds of traditional elements, there was also the new element of benefits that will accrue by being seen to be involved in charity. So, for instance, the certification from the colonial state establishment about the public spiritedness of the people who are so munificent. And also they would, some of them, so if they are making very substantial contributions to the building of big institutions, so the colonial state would also very generously confer titles on them. So in this way, it tried to build, so not only kind of individuals giving donations and making contributions, but also to encourage people to come together in an associational sense. So coming together, voluntarily giving their money as well as their time, their efforts towards public causes in general, and in this case medicine. And of course, it's not like because that they were very particularly interested in building some great social or sociological new kinds of sociological structures or virtues among Indians. And in any case, it's not like Indians or any other community, indigenous communities that the colonizers encountered didn't have that kind of coming together. So historically, so people have had kinds of group organizations. In fact, they have had even elections many centuries back in India. So people coming together at the town level, at the local level for common causes is not something new. And so it's not like the British wanted to cultivate new kinds of things like this voluntary associational culture as part of their civilizing mission. And also the other argument that they were using, no, this will promote in them a sense of self-reliance rather than depending for everything on the government. So that also is not to be taken too seriously, because if that was the case, then from these early days itself, from the say the 1780s or the early 1800s, the colonial state would have come up with things with real devolution of power, training them to be self-reliant, all that, which they did only with, say, the Government of India Act of 1909 or 1919. Minto Morley, Montague Chelmsford reforms and all those things. So those were sent to supposed to be training the Indians in self-government, self-reliance, all that. So why did they have to wait that long? So if this was the case, like this could have started even earlier. So that argument of self-reliance also has to be taken with a pinch of salt, because we know why. What's the reason why this kind of voluntary associational culture was sought to be promoted? Maybe at some level, okay, there was some genuine interest to promote this kind of public spiritedness among Indians, but we know the actual reason from the financial point of view. And talking about the contributions by the people of a locality, so the contributions may be donations or regular monthly subscriptions to a given cause. So the colonial state expected that more for the local facilities. So it's not like you are living in this area, so you have to, they are expecting to donate for something, some all India thing or something happening elsewhere other than. So that is more like what you can all call locality based volunteerism. So which is basically the setting up or the maintenance of local dispensaries in the field of healthcare. So local dispensaries or hospitals. So the expenses that go to, if not the entire, so substantial amount of the expenses that go to setting up the facilities, the institutions, not only hospitals but even other institutions, training and other facilities, kind of thing. And then for the long-term running of those hospitals or institutions in terms of recurring expenses and salaries. So it was not necessarily for institutions that had a wider ambit at the national or at the provincial level, even beyond the immediate locality. So this was all the kind of expectation from the colonial state for the various reasons that we have seen. But what was it on the other side? How did the Indians react to all of this? So there was considerable level of positive reaction due to several reasons, some of which I have already hinted. So for instance, so this donation and being seen so public spirited was a way of getting close to the centers of power, that proximity to the state apparatus, if not to the particular individuals like a viceroy or governor or others. And especially with regard to the old landed elite who were tied with interests, ties of self-interest, because these were the people on whom the colonial state depended a lot in its early days, with whom it set up very favorable land revenue settlement arrangements and all that. And of course, in course of time, even after that, when the new elite arose, the colonial state felt more comfortable with this old elite, because the new elite, the new educated elite, seemed to be too much of a problem, asking too many questions and talking in their own language, quoting principles of liberalism, quoting Western constitutions, legal legal principles, things like that. So they were, the new educated elite were in some sense seen to be a pain created by their own systems. So therefore the old elite were particularly precious. And as you know, the British tried to play the game of divide and rule across various axes. So not only with regard to religion, but the new elite also, so for their own reasons. So the new, either the business elite or the educational elite, so they also warmed up to these kinds of opportunities. And because of the commercial changes brought about by colonialism, so though by and large it benefited, and they're all tuned to the requirements of the East India Company or the colonizers in general, or the colonial state, but it did spawn a new culture of commercial prosperity among at least some of the Indian classes, and not only the traditional business classes, but even classes which are not traditionally associated with business. Even so, they started, there's lots of new avenues open, and also with the coming of technologies like steam driven shipping and railways and telegraph and all that. So there's a lot more connectivity and a lot more that could be done on the commercial sector, which many Indians too capitalized on. So this part in commercial activities and with vibrant mercantile communities, so there was a lot of money. So even people who are not in the local caste structure, so even people who are not of high status according to that hierarchy, could make money, but then so money is there, but then the status would be what it was. So that so that's the thing about the caste system. So one can't change the caste or all the things that go with it, the way you are looked upon and all that. So this volunteerism, this kind of a donation and being associated with this kind of public work, so was another form of, so if you can't do anything, is that almost a fixed set of status related equations with regard to the caste system. So at least this provided a new avenue for status. So on the one hand, so you have money, but but without status, but this is also welcome, and and apart from stature, the new stature, growing stature, this also gave a sense of belonging to the larger community and being looked up by the community at large. So it was very, in several ways, it was very profitable in a larger sense, beyond the commercial profits. So it was very useful to make a visible contribution. So it should be seen. That's the idea. So that so only when it's seen, so you get the fruits of it. That stature, the commendation, the exaltation, exalted place in society. So visible contributions to all kinds of organizations, like religious organizations or construction of public facilities, motels for travelers and things like that. So that spirit was extended to the domain of health also, for building, contributing to building of hospitals and dispensaries. So what we may call a new culture of medical philanthropy. And of course, so there's also, as they say, so here things literally set on stone. So it's a matter of pride that it's forever, for at least a few decades or hundreds of years, your family's name, Dr. Mishra's block, Radhakrishnan ward, maternity ward, and so it's a sense of pride for the entire family and their children. Oh, this is my grandfather, that Mishra, he contributed to this gynecology lab, the ward, things like that. So either on the corridors or wards or even on particular beds. So this by the generous contribution of Ramsamy Reddyar. Okay, so it's nice. So those kinds of benefits, social benefits are there. At another level, so beyond all this kind of social stature, visibility, so in a way it is also kind of a willing participation in the modern Western culture of science-based public enterprises. So it's for the colonizer, it is a double cultural imprint. So one was the originally intended volunteerism, which they claimed they are implanting, cultivating. On the other hand, the other imprint they are leaving is the indigenous people themselves voluntarily subscribing to, contributing to the structure of not just the physical structure, but the accepting the epistemological order, Western medicine based on scientific and secular principles. So it's not just the money which was going, so very by the money that people give, they are participating, and by that very fact they are also kind of acknowledging, accepting that, for instance, if you are donating to a temple, so it also means that you are a believer. Of course, it can happen that some people who are not related to religion, just because of the fact that it's being given to the temple, it will raise your stature, they might give for that, but most often, so you give to the causes which are dear to your heart. So in this case, though you are also on the one side doing it for, say, social stature, this is also indirectly you are acknowledging, you are happy about the kind of new culture, and you are also a direct or indirect participant. It's not like you are going and doing the scientific activity or the clinical job, but you are also kind of subscribing. You're subscribing not only in money terms, but you're also subscribing to that entire worldview, that culture. So that is another thing which we have to particularly note in mind. So based on all this, so as I said, so there was an expectation on the one side, on the other side there was eager participation from the side of the Indians, and so started coming the charitable dispensaries to start with, and we also have to keep in mind that so enclavism was not sustainable. So sooner or later, there had to be that move from enclavism, interest in particular enclaves, special enclaves, to larger public health. So in that kind of a transition, so these charitable dispensaries, so starting from the 1830s, so these were the earliest entry points or experience of public health for the Indian people. So more than large state funded or established hospitals. So even some of these dispensaries, maybe the state had the initiative, but then there is a substantial amount of charitable contributions involved. But so these dispensaries were the first telltale signs of public health infrastructure. And some of them also, this is also interesting given the context of the funders. So some of these were also focused on particular communities to which the donors belonged. So for instance, they would be particular to have it or name it, or they as a so and so with such name, maybe the funder's name, or generally then with this identification, it's a Marwari Hindu hospital, or a particular ward will be, this is the Parsi ward of the of some hospital. This the similarly some other community, the wing of that hospital, and this is particularly important because hospitals or any institutions, when they are acquired or transplanted to another location or a culture, so it's not that they maintain the same essentials. So in fact, they undergo substantial changes because of the local culture. So hospital is one good example. So hospital in England is not the same as hospital in India, just as they said disease in Britain is not the same as disease in India. So hospital in Britain has its own, so hospital maybe the kinds of infrastructure, the kinds of techniques, the technologies, the gadgets, maybe same, and of course even some of them also have to be customized according to the local climate and availability of electricity and other such things. But in terms of culture, so for instance here the hospitals had to incorporate features like caste consciousness. So people of all kinds of different kinds of castes can't be indiscriminately put in a ward. So there had to be all these kinds of requirements. This is a Brahmin ward, so this ward, that ward. So that way, so for instance, Parsis particularly in some cases, so they wanted the one was the show of their public spirit. So and it's quite also natural. So it's they gave it. So they want some prominence for their community's name. That was one angle, but there's also the angle of like that separation, different kind of a segregation. So segregation in wards. So of course, we are not saying that these are not there in other contexts. So the Western context, there are there may be other kinds of segregations based on class, color, but that's what in each cultural situation. So the same institutions will undergo emendations, changes, modifications. So that's something, that's a larger element that we have to take from this course, and you can find different examples of it. Just as for instance the same institutional setup is trying to draw upon the spirit, the charitable spirit which is already existing in the culture, though they claim that they are creating it almost anew. So apart from the contributions to hospitals and dispensaries directly, so they could also be made to corpus funds like the Dufferin Fund and IRFA, because in the beginning I was saying that most of the contributions were for particular institutions, and that too very local. Yet here, so here we are not looking at particular institutions, so it's a fund. So the funder at that point will not know that this is going for this particular hospital or this structure or a particular ward or anything. So Dufferin Fund, as you know, like it was started in 1885 with the larger purpose of providing personnel particularly women personnel, directed particularly to the health of women and also children. That fund could go to all kinds of things, to recruit people, to train people, to bring them from England to here, to settle them, or to even start hospitals, special hospitals which are meant exclusive for women and children. So, with regard to the Dufferin Fund, so therefore it could go to that corpus or to the particular Dufferin hospitals, and which may be actually set up in that locality, or it can be elsewhere. So, similarly, IRFA is another such fund started in 1911, but this was basically for raising funds for research. So, the equivalent of what we call now in the field of medicine, the ICMR, Indian Council for Medical Research. So, here the funds were collected primarily for recruiting and training researchers, and the IRFA's responsibility was also to channelize the funds to particular areas which are seen to be of primary importance, because this was funded mainly by an annual grant from the government, but considerable contributions to this was also made from private sources. And yet another form of response to the colonial states' expectation for non-state subscription was from commercial organizations. So, that again could be both Indian or European ones. For instance, companies like the Bengal Coal Company, they sponsored some of the local hospitals and salaries for the staff. And one of the most exemplary cases is that of the starting of the Calcutta School of Tropical Medicine. So, even when its foundations were laid in 1914, we have the Calcutta School of Tropical Medicine Endowment Fund, so which was basically meant to invite contributions from different sources, and and as expected, it received contributions not only from individuals and general companies and commercial organizations. There were contributions in particular from specific industries which would actually directly benefit from the work done by this particular school, the School of Tropical Medicine. So, for instance, the tea industry or the jute or the mining industry. So, it was more like a deal. So, it was not like just giving out of pure altruism. So, what is the deal? So, in return for a fixed annual contribution, so much rupees for say 15 years to the institute. So, in return for that kind of commitment, so they were promised results from the research or from the activities of the school, which should actually go to contribute to improving the working conditions of the labor force, especially those related to health, the kind of particular diseases, say for instance hookworm disease in some of the plantations. So, that would be addressed by the work done at the school. So, therefore, the money given, so it is not just kind of a charitable philanthropic activity, it is also to be seen as a kind of an investment. So, that so this amount you are investing in order to save yourself from bigger kinds of expenditure which will happen if some kind of a local endemic or epidemic is happening, which will affect directly these kinds of industries. And not only here within the colony itself, so even some of the institutions in the metropolis, like so for instance the London School of Tropical Medicine, so they appealed and received funds not from companies there, so that also would have happened, but from the Indian Railways company here. So, because Indian Railways had also its own problems, so it was also getting a bad name for some of the its own contribution to diseases due to the kind of construction works and digging and the water stagnation and all that, and malaria problem in its construction areas. So it is not surprising that the school there in London for its researches on tropical medicine, and malaria, as we all know, is one of the mother of all tropical diseases as it was projected. So there's an interesting contribution connection then across the seas. So what we see is the very interesting combination of commerce, this kind of public spirited donation and research, but then there's always this danger of veering away from public health, because once these kinds of industrial interests, commercial interests come in, there is always the danger that then they may hijack the lines of research. So this pattern, because all this while we have been talking about the colonial state and its expectation, and of course, as we know, the colonial state was clearly biased to Western medical system and its kind of infrastructure. So on the one hand, there was a warm response to that, but the old rich as well as the new rich meaning those who became rich to the new opportunities opened through colonialism, not only the commercial openings but new avenues like education, law and other such businesses. So all of them also showed patronage towards indigenous systems also. However much the colonial state liked or did not like it, and especially in the later days, say from the early part of the 20th century, when the nationalistic spirit was also rising, and also we see medical revivalism among various indigenous medical systems also aligning with that rising nationalistic fervor. So there were considerable donations and funds for setting up Ayurvedic or Unani and other kinds of institutions for learning or dispensaries. So we have to keep that also in mind. So on the one hand, because we saw the participation in the healthcare infrastructure and its development through donations also meant kind of subscribing to that. But now with the changed, so it's not a contradiction. So now with the changed circumstances, increasing national consciousness, and with the revitalization movement, so the same people who had the money did not hesitate to contribute to these alternative systems. And one final point here is that so when they were contributing to these institutions, there were also free dispensary services at these institutes. So this is also something to be noted, since we have been talking a lot about medical institutions, training, all that. So apart from the fact that it trains a ever new crop of health professional for the profession, so it's also useful for the trainees themselves, the fact that the dispensary services are there. So that is one is the training part, but it is important also to have. That's why all or most of the medical colleges have hospitals attached to them. So it's not that just they are doing a service, and most of them do free service, but it's also benefit to them. So the patients have ever new kinds of people, ever new kinds of diseases, so ever new like research problems for scientists. Like here, there are new things that you can learn from people's disease and miseries. So therefore, so that free dispensary service is also one important contribution, public contribution to the field of medicine, or largely to one aspect of medical philanthropy. So on this note, we will close this lecture. Thank you.